So I'm gonna kick off the round of questions with a little story. So I was working on an app store, a mobile app store in 2006. We had the killer app, which was email. There were no other killer apps. We had about 400,000 users. And so we decided, let's open an app store. Let's let other people bring enterprise applications to the app store. We only had 3 apps built, and no one else used any of the other applications. But fast forward 3 years later, we had better internet, we had better bandwidth, we had better battery life, we had more memory on devices. It was a confluence of innovation that happened, and all of a sudden mobile scaled, and it was a knee of the curve. So I want to just ask the panelists, what's your perspective on the confluence of factors that are coming together right now, and how do you think that's going to impact scaling of not just transactions, but usage, users, developers in the space, et cetera? So let's...
Yeah, I think it's that confluence that we are all really seeking for here in the blockchain space, because we know the technology is the future. We're confident of that. We believe in that. And I think in the early days of the internet, that's a really good example. We knew it was the future, but it was really hard to identify what the future was going to look like. You know, I was trying myself to do little startups in the Web 1 world. I remember pets.com, where it's just like clearly the internet and pets.com are the future. And it was the future, right? Like today, people buy, you know, most of their stuff for their pets online, yet pets.com was simply too early. So you need this sort of like magical confluence of all the pieces. I mean, I would say probably for pets.com, they needed more people to be comfortable with like paying online. And, you know, something that's really interesting, I spent a number of years living in Europe, and in Italy, eBay hasn't really taken off because people don't trust their packages won't be stolen in the mail. And so I actually once tried to buy something in Italy, and the post person who came to me had Googled me prior and tried to sell me other people's packages that he thought I would be interested in buying. And for that reason, despite the internet, despite paying online, people didn't use eBay because they were missing that factor of just trust in the fact that things would be delivered. So sometimes, you know, maybe in this case with blockchain, it's trust in the fact that we're not doing terrorism and money laundering, something. But there are this magical confluence of factors where you need all the pieces to come together. And sometimes the pieces are outside of what you have control over, what you're doing. But without that, you're just not going to hit that scale, even if you have that magical product that everyone really does want.
Yeah, so I would come at this, I guess, to start with from kind of a philosophical standpoint, which is defining, like, you know, for different applications, use cases, etc. Scale means different things, right? For DeFi, it might mean the amount of capital locked or allocated. For us, it means being able to serve ever-increasing numbers of users without compromising on the decentralized core of Audius. And what I mean by that is, you know, Audius is a fully decentralized community-operated network. All of the content is posted in a decentralized way, and content is listed on chain via transaction. So, you know, whether it's, you know, in our case right now, the Ethereum blockchain is the best way to achieve that sort of on-chain singleton aspect of the product. But arguably, it's just, I mean, it's not a question of like TPS or all of these random numbers. It's just how do we continue to serve the use case we've created in a way that is still secure and decentralized. So kind of, you know, coming at it from that angle, I mean, there are a lot of different approaches to solving that problem. In our case, you know, a lot of it does boil down to some of these traditional parameters like TPS and other things, but you know, where we're at is kind of, you know, we found this very specific use case that our artists love, and that they can only distribute certain types of content with us. They can't distribute it anywhere else for a variety of reasons. And it's our job to just continue to be able to serve ever increasing numbers of those folks. But what's interesting with crypto networks is SKALE is often a kind of, it works until it doesn't, right? In our case, like at peak times, our first week we're using over 50% of blocks on this network called POA network that we use. It's an Ethereum sidechain, but we use that for some of our content addressing and whatnot. That everything worked totally fine, right, with us using 50% of blocks. But seeing that happen, we know that once we cross the threshold of using more than, having enough volume to use more than 100% of blocks, everything will break in a very kind of direct way, right? In that it's kind of this binary thing, right? It's like either we can continue to serve these users, or latency will pile up and cause us problems. So I know that's somewhat a kind of wishy-washy answer, but that really is how we're thinking about it. It's just how can we continue to grow, and what are the best paths to that? And because of folks like SKALE and many others here at the conference, there are lots and lots of choices for us as a developer in the ecosystem, which is amazing.
Yeah, so when we think about scaling, I think from our perspective, since we're trying to make sure that the average person can use blockchain applications, the scaling here is from the technical blockchain enthusiastic people to the average person, and there's a lot of challenges along the way. For instance, one of the early challenges we had was, how do people pay for gas fees, which is a problem both from there's the technological problem, which is, you gotta go to an exchange, you gotta go buy some ether, and usually back then it was buying hundreds of dollars at least to make sense financially, and then coming back. And it was a very complicated process, but there's also the psychological aspect of, people, they don't feel comfortable paying gas fees. And we started out by giving people $1 just to have a proof of concept, showing that, once we get that off the table, people can actually complete flows in dApps and use them. Obviously, that's not scalable, and then you have solutions like the gas station network coming along. But I think also this Confluence that you talked about, that's also something that we see kind of scaling up, because adding stuff like sidechains, such as SKALE, which allows dApps to operate, in a different way than they could before, because we're solving this problem of how do people actually use the blockchain when there is not just a couple of people tinkering with it, but you have this, we're prepping up for this influx of users. So it's stuff like that. It's stuff like a lot of different standards and EAPs that we see everybody kind of congregating around, which is very, very great. And that's also growing in a very big way. And I stipulate that the killer dApp that everybody is waiting for has come along maybe a year and a half ago. We had our pets.com. It's just that they had to build DAI from scratch. They had to build a sidechain. They build their own state channel, whatever. And you can't build everything from scratch. Web 2 is where it is, because of this, growing mass of everything. So I think that's how we're going to be seeing the scaling, the collaboration.